Well, all right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you're listening to Radio Science News. This is Richard Pollack. I'm going to be broadcasting from back here in good old, wonderful, wild West Virginia. Robert and Libby Strong are actually at the National Science Teachers Association. I think it's a regional meeting in Houston, Texas. They left the Smart Center, which is in Center Market Wheeling, and headed out earlier this week, and they've been down there just bathing in all the science that they can take. Down, it's one of the really neat events that we've all attended in the past. The National Science Teachers Association has regional and national meetings, and I think this is the regional for that area, and then later on in Chicago, I'm pretty sure Robert and Libby will be headed out that way. I'm expecting them to call in just a few minutes and maybe catch up on some of the goings on. I know they did a presentation there, and we'll talk about that. And then I'm really curious about some of the things that may be going on with science teaching in general. I know there's just that interesting coincidence that so many of the science books and other educational books for the nation sometimes have their beginnings or perhaps endings, because the folks that do the Texas school book determinations sometimes influence the rest of the country. So we'll be talking about that. Now, if I had Robert here in the studio with me, the first thing he would do would be to invite you to head to the launch pad of science, which is on radiosciencenews.org, by starting at smartcenter.org. That's kind of like the overarching parent organization for Smart Center Market and Near Earth Object Foundation and several other things, including Radio Science News. So if you were to go to smartcenter.org, you would find a little rainbow t-shirt kind of logo partway down the page, and above it says Radio Science News. Click on that and it'll take you to the launch pad of science. Now, if you want to just go directly, you can just go to radiosciencenews.org. That's no spaces and doesn't have to be capitalized or anything. So it's radiosciencenews.org. And when you do, the first thing you'll see is just a few listings. We try to keep the page kind of uncluttered and generic, because this is just your starting point, or as we say, your launch pad to get to the topics that we hope to be talking about, or at least referring you to. But Radio Science News, sponsored by Near Earth Object Foundation, Smart Center Market, and of course Smart Center. Right now in our present state, we are broadcasting on Sundays from 2 to 3 p.m. and Wednesdays from 8 to 9 p.m. on WEJP 107.1 FM Wheeling Community Radio. So kind of check into that if you're in the Wheeling area. That's convenient. It's I believe they stream it and broadcast it as an FM station. The WEJP 107.1 FM is accessible here in the Wheeling area, and I know some folks like to hear it that way. Now, the other opportunity is that on Sunday nights, following our Saturday broadcast that we do, is you can find WHDD Robin Hood Radio, and the NPR broadcast of Radio Science News occurs on the WHDD Robin Hood Radio, the smallest NPR station in the nation, and they're proud of it. They like what they do, and we do too. So that's some of the ways you can get this. Now, we just leave these links and this website up all the time. So The thing that I like to explain to you is that as we're doing this show, or as you're listening to it, you can be on Radio Science News, the launchpad of science, and basically just following the links. Now, the other thing that I always say is there are probably too many topics up here, and if Robert and I were to take one of the topics, especially if it were about physics or something astronomical, we could probably spend an entire half hour or so on each topic, and we don't want to do that. Sometimes I'm just putting these up here so that we can call your attention to them, discuss them a little bit, maybe give you some perspective that we might have, but then invite you to take the time to look these topics over. So I've got a lot of things. I have a link to the National Science Teachers Association Houston meeting, some new information about Omicron, especially the news about the latest variant, if you're all following that. The thing that you've probably all heard, that there's been another booster shot that's been approved by CDC and FDA and everybody for folks in certain categories. So we're going to just touch on that. One of the COVID stories that I found very interesting that kind of popped up this week was there was an actual, what they would call a COVID challenge test. Now, this is something that they didn't do during the height of the pandemic, because a challenge is where you take a whole bunch of healthy people and on purpose expose them to the COVID virus and then see what you can learn from it. So that's kind of finally happened with a small group, and there's some interesting information within that. Some cool stuff happening with NASA's moon rocket. I think actually yesterday there was a launch, or it wasn't actually a launch. We'll talk about what it was. It was a pre-launch test that had to do with the fueling and the fuel tanks and all sorts of things like that. Interesting story about the genome, the human genome, which we've all kind of, I kind of thought, we already did the genome. It's been entirely done. But actually, this is the first time at this point in history where they have the absolute complete, no spaces left out genome has been created. So we'll talk about that. Farthest star, the Hubble Space Telescope, which is still bringing in some pretty good information, has at this point, and it may change as we do other things, but they've basically been able to sense, to visualize, to detect literally the farthest star so far from where we are, which has implications as to when these particular stars systems developed and how long after the Big Bang and all that. Cool story about squid skin. Squid skin. We'd like to do stories about biomimetics, where interesting things that actually occur in the real world in nature sometimes can be studied and used to develop really amazing things in our world. I have a couple of neat stories about Innovate, mostly related to climate and environmental things. I kind of found it interesting because it's from Washington University, I think, University of Washington, and it has to do with some cool things people are looking at. And of course, we as scientists like to think we always do great things, but there have been many failures. I found this article called 10 Failures really interesting, because some of the biggest stories and the biggest things in science, initially, people didn't really understand them, or they basically failed to comprehend what they were looking at. So that was kind of a cool idea. I have a thing about the pause. A lot of people spent the past decade or so arguing about climate change and especially global warming, and probably this may go down as one of the 11th failures, but wait a minute. I think I have Robert and Libby calling in right now. Let's see what we have here. This sounds like it could be the folks. Is this indeed Robert and Libby Strong?
Hey there.
Hey there, Mr. Richard. How's it going?
Good. Houston, we don't have a problem, I'm hoping. So you guys
we do not.
You guys are hooked up from Houston. Well, let me just welcome you guys to this episode of Radio Science News, and I'm really excited to hear about what's going on in Houston. I was just kind of plowing through some of the topics, and then I was thinking, it'd be really nice if you guys were able to call in and touch bases. So, and I want to spend as much time as I can with you guys in Houston. In fact, I wish I were there because right now it's like 36 degrees, and even though
We
the
heard
sun,
that on the weather. That's amazing.
it is, I know. It's other things beside amazing, but it's not that bad. It's beautifully. The sun came up on a bright, crisp morning because, as you know, when those northern systems come down and the air is absolutely clear, that means it gets really cold. But then the sun is great right now. So, how's it in Houston?
It is warm.
Yeah.
Not real warm though, and not very humid. Not like the last time when we were here in August. So
Yeah.
all of the folks who are local say, "Oh yeah, April's not bad. March, April." So for humidity. So we're glad about that.
Well, that is good. And I know I don't want to offend anybody in Houston, but when my wife and I recently passed through Texas, we on purpose skipped Houston. Well, the time before that I was in Houston, I remember that they had mosquitoes that were so big they could bite through blue jeans. That's all I can say. To
Yes, they also discussed this mosquito situation.
Oh.
So yeah, we're actually doing pretty well. We spent yesterday evening. They had a special event over at the Houston Museum of Natural History.
Oh, nice.
And we left out with a very great paleontologist. Never even got his last name, but his name is Neil. And he gave us like a guided tour of their extensive fossil collection.
Oh, nice.
So awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have all kinds of awesome pictures, and that'll be really fun to share when we get back. So that was an interesting evening at the museum.
That's great.
After our presentation yesterday from 2 to 3, we had a reasonably good turnout. The room was full, so that was good, and we had a lot of fun.
Well, before you move on, I want you to tell me a little bit about your presentation because I know that's one of the really neat things. A lot of people just attend these various conventions and things, but one of the neat things that Smart Center and you guys, and when I've had a chance to go with you, have always found important is to try to actually do a presentation. So tell me a little bit about what you did.
Okay, we did a program called Scaling the Universe.
Whoa.
And we did everything from how big is an atom to how many stars are there in the observable universe.
Nice.
It was one solid hour of nonstop science, fun, up and down and doing things. It was very, very fun.
Obviously, a lot of math integration. Most of the participants were middle school and above.
Yeah.
And from all over the country, and I think a couple international teachers also in our session. So that was really interesting. Always good to share ideas and get ideas from the teachers too, because they go, "Oh, well, I do something kind of like this, except I also do," and we're like, "Ooh, that's pretty cool." So. It's good for Robert and for me to come to these, especially from such a long hiatus, because when you do professional development with teachers and you do so many workshops and things, and we're not closely affiliated with any particular school system that would provide any professional development, we need professional development ourselves. And it's the best way to get it. We actually, that Peter Hotez, who is often on the various news channels.
Oh yeah, he's quite a.
He was a keynote speaker.
Oh.
So we actually heard him in person. For example, we heard about the specific Mars missions that are going on with the rovers, Curiosity, Perseverance, all of that sort of thing. So you have national programs, nationally known scientists and science educators that are able to speak, authors, that sign your books. It's really a great opportunity for any science teacher who's never been to one of these conferences. They really need to try to do that at some point in the near future, because it's really, there's nothing like the in-person interaction. I mean, we could have taken a virtual tour of that museum, but it would not compare to actually being there, and especially having the expertise of Neil. And Neil, if you're out there, thank you very much. That was so much fun. So, yeah.
Well, in Texas is an amazing place for fossils and things too. I mean, I was always kind of aware of that, but in recent travels, we were in There's a big canyon in Texas called Palo Duro, and it cuts. It's like actually the second largest canyon next to the Grand Canyon in the United States, and yet I was relatively unaware of it. But one of the neat things is in the Palo Duro State Park they have a really nice little museum, and it included. I was amazed at how many basic layers of ancient strata were within this canyon system, and just the stuff that was that you just wouldn't think would be there.
Right.
Of course, we're talking about marine fossils and all sorts of other things that were surprising and just amazing at the same time. So, very cool.
Yeah.
Now, I did have here's the big question. It was in the back of my mind when I realized, because I knew you guys were headed out to this, and at first I was thinking when I was looking at the NSTA, I do have a link for the NSTA Houston. I'm not sure if you guys are following the links today. You're probably out and about.
No.
But so I know that this actually a regional convention or conference, or is it?
No, it's a national / international.
Okay, because I know there's one in Chicago later. I happened to see that on the web. But so this is actually that's cool. It's like you say, an international thing. Here's the question that was burning in my mind when I saw that it was Texas. Robert's going, uh-oh, this is going to cause. No, I don't expect any trouble. But I would have to think that probably one of the most amazing series of conversations you would have with all these really excellent teachers in the state of Texas would be about things that are going on in like school books and in the basic science education challenges that teachers are facing these days. Did you guys have any interesting back and forth on that?
No, actually, no.
No, but I do know that they have multiple sessions going on for Texas teachers. I walked into one today thinking that it was a generalized standards kind of presentation, but it was specifically Texas is working on their science standards. And I'm certain that there's going to be some pushback about certain things that most science teachers would like to see included, and there's probably going to be some political fallout. Yeah. I mean, we've seen that in West Virginia. Obviously, we're seeing it now with the just the way that things are implemented. There's a lot of politics at play. I just came from a really cool session on science literacy, though, and it was really kind of cool. They gave us some different news articles, and we were to determine whether they were real or not. And then talked about science literacy and what it is and how important it is to try to move students along in their science literacy, in large part, because it helps to create an informed citizenry, which will help to facilitate democracy over time.
Sounds like a plan. I like that.
I thought that was awesome, and I'm glad that we were able to get some of that information. But those particular presenters were from Texas.
Yeah.
So
that's neat. Yeah.
There are lots of people in Texas that are trying very hard to make sure that our democracy stays strong, and that we're able to discern the real and fake news from one another.
Good idea.
Especially when it comes to science.
Well, and as you say, everything else kind of devolves from that. The idea that you have accurate information, and again, about anything, but in particular science stuff. I had an interesting conversation with a very well-educated person who's so frustrated about the news and what's going on, and it was kind of they asked me kind of a loaded question. They asked me if did I really trust any news source that I was listening to,
wow.
And I thought, this sounds, because it sounded an awful lot like I know this is one of the things that everybody runs into. Well, you can't trust everybody. Everybody lies. And so I basically had my answer, and I hope this was diplomatic. I mean, I was trying to be kind and diplomatic and not rain on anybody's parade. But my point was kind of, that as a person who likes to look at things from a science perspective, I like to look at things, if I can, from direct evidence. Like if somebody shows me a picture of some city that it looked like a month ago, and then shows me a picture of what it looks like today, then I can make my own decisions because I'm trying to get, the information closest to the source. And I still felt a little uncomfortable because I got the sense that in the busy world that we're in, so many people just they kind of do one of two things. If they're backing away from information, they only look at one particular thing and assume that's all correct, or they get to the point where they go, well, I just can't trust anybody. Who knows about this climate thing and that kind of a thing. And I think that's dangerous. I think it's
it sure is.
Yep.
So, yeah, and I know that Texas, as I remember, one of the big things was that Texas is the place where and I don't know exactly all the pertinent reasons, but they're the ones that decide an awful lot about which school books will be approved,
Right.
and therefore, people that publish books go, well, we have to make it so it's okay in Texas, and so I think that's an interesting part of it too. So
it really is. Well, we're going to have to jet to our
Great.
next session here, so wish we did have a jetpack. It's a pretty big convention center, but I think we're fairly close by.
Well, that's
So,
good. And
No jetpacks.
We will talk to you soon. We're leaving on a jet plane tomorrow. So
she's leaving on a jet plane. Well, I do have one great topic that will relate to your thing, scaling the universe, because the Hubble Space Telescope the farthest star that they've been able to detect so far was just detected. That was a cool story. So anyway,
yeah,
you guys have.
I saw that online. I don't even know if I've shared it with Robert.
No,
Yes, we've been kind of running around.
Well,
but,
good. Well, you guys.
Thank you, Richard,
you
and
guys-
we'll see you soon.
Good. Scoot off and get a lot of free pens while you're there and that kind of stuff.
We sure will.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Goodbye, Robert. Goodbye, Libby. All right. That of course was Robert Strong and Libby Strong, and they're the folks that run the Smart Center Market in Center Market Wheeling. If you're in their local area, get down there and check out what they're doing, because as things are opening up, they're starting to re-engage in a big way with the science community and the kids here in Wheeling, West Virginia. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue at radiosciencenews.org, go through some of these topics, and I'm going to touch on. There's no way I'll ever get through all of these, but that's okay, because sometimes I'll bounce them ahead to the next week when Robert and I can peruse them and give you a little intro to them. But again, the big thing is these links stay up, and what's really nice is for you to follow along with the radio show and the links at the same time if you're listening on one of the sources I mentioned earlier, and they're all listed on the page, or just take the time to look at them yourself. So first of all, if you are interested in what Robert and Libby are doing, the first link I have up is actually to the National Science Teacher Association webpage, and I'm just clicking on it real quick, and it's talking about Houston 22, the National Conference, March 31st through April 2nd. And I think one of the neat things about NSTA is they have a whole thing. If you take a look at sessions and events, click on there, schedule, topics, what's happening in Houston, browse the sessions. There's some stuff. I'm seeing what Libby had mentioned, that there was a whole section that was sort of science versus anti-science versus COVID-19, and I do see Peter Hotez as one of the speakers. You probably have seen him on a lot of the cable shows talking about things over the past couple of years. So if you scroll down, you'll see a bunch of stuff, and I know exploring Mars with curiosity and perseverance. Walden warming climate change comes to Thoreau's Concord. So a lot of really good stuff, a lot of good links. North Grumman's there. So take a look at that, get a sense of what's going on, and I'm pretty sure that there are links to all kinds of really good information. Now, if you are in fact a teacher, that'll even be more pertinent to you, but I'm sure it's all interesting anyway. So take a look at that. I'm going to just touch on some of the stories about Omicron. The first one is kind of just a big update from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Omicron variant, what you need to know. I'm sure that a lot of people have been paying attention to the fact that This, in fact, it's all about Omicron. There are links to test, data tracker, hospitalization forecast. There's so much information here that I'm not going to just delve into now, but it's the kind of stuff that if you're looking for a little more information, I know one of the things that was frustrating to a lot of people was when we had the Omicron and we had variants. They're talking about the BA dot one, BA 1.1, and the BA2, which is currently the one of most concern now because it's spreading forward. So take the time to look through this. One of the big things you'll want to look at is information about vaccines, and we like to always say, just as we hope you will hear from multiple other places, one of the best things you can do is get your vaccine or get your boosters. We'll talk about that in a second. I'm just kind of scrolling down real quick, and it just has all of the good information that we have, how you can get tested, how you can get vaccines, and a bunch of other stuff. Genomic surveillance. Here's a science brief, the lineage of the various Omicrons. This is a lot of stuff. So again, if we were just to talk about that for the whole show, it would probably be too much to take at once. I'm going to do the next link is from Medical Express. It's talking about the second booster approved as an option for additional protection against COVID-19. And I would say that actually my wife and I already got the booster, and I've never had any much of a reaction to it at all. I would say if you need a little bit of data that comes from my household, I would say that we both experienced just some kind of mild, basically 24 hours or so after the shot and for a period of time. So I always kind of felt a reaction on the second day. I just felt a little bit, no real pain or stiffness or anything, but just maybe a little bit of tiredness. And the way I usually deal with that is I go out and do something to keep me moving so that I don't experience too much. So this is a whole thing talking about the booster, their rationale. There's it's talking about, according to the CDC, the additional booster should be given at least 4 months after the initial booster. There's not that much research yet on the use of the fourth dose. Other countries have done some stuff. However, emerging evidence finds effectiveness against COVID-19 and its variants may start to diminish 3 to 6 months after your initial booster, so that's why they moved to this other one. The other thing that I do look forward to finding out, I know that Pfizer and some folks were working on one that was more specific to the Omicron variants, but I believe this is the initial, this is just another dose of the initial Pfizer, BioNTech, or Moderna, depending on which one you're going to be getting. All right, I'm going to click ahead to the next link, which says challenge. Now, I thought this was an interesting, since I'm just going to touch on this as well, because this is something you're going to want to read through. This just came out on Friday. First human challenge trials show how COVID-19 strikes. Now, this is really it's a small group, but it says a group of 36 volunteers have completed the first human challenge study of COVID-19. So, first of all, the idea of what is a challenge test, and again, first human challenge, the idea is that they take a group of people who are basically healthy and have no prior vaccinations or who have not contracted COVID before, and then they, on purpose, as a challenge, expose them to the COVID-19. Now, this is something that is not done that often because, especially if you're dealing with something that could prove fatal, you don't want to be, a challenge thing is maybe not the best way to go. But it says for this study, 36 volunteers were between the ages of 18 and 30 and had no risk factors for severe COVID-19. So it says the research team infected the group with a tiny drop of fluid of the original virus strain that was delivered through a thin tube inserted into their nose. So this was the original one. Now, it also talks about some other things they could have done, or they mentioned remdesivir and they mentioned monoclonal antibodies, but they didn't give anybody any of that. They want to get a sense of what happened. So you can go down and read through the details. It talks about people losing their smell but then recovering it. 18 of the 36 did become infected. The study volunteers shed virus for about 6.5 days on average, or up to 12 days, even with no symptoms. I think one of the interesting things was the fact that the people started shedding a lot of virus after being exposed, but well before having any symptoms. And then a lot of people never showed symptoms. So there's some interesting stuff in here that they're looking. And I will say that probably the most fascinating thing about it was the people who absolutely did not get it. Even though you're thinking, well, this is just part of the population. What was it? And this will probably be part of the research going forward. Is why did these people not get it? What was it? And it mentions some interesting things about our. At the very end, I think. Let me scroll down real quick. Oh, here it is. The group will also continue studying the 18 people who didn't get sick despite receiving the same amount of virus. Those individuals also never developed any antibodies and were screened for closely related viruses to rule out cross protection. So that term itself is one of the interesting things, and I thought this was a neat phrase. There are lots of other things that help protect us. Said one of the doctors, there are barriers in the nose. There are different kinds of proteins and things which are very ancient primordial protective systems, and they are likely to have been contributing to them not being infected. And I thought this was probably one of the most interesting things, where he said, we are really interested in trying to understand what those are. So that goes to the concept that a lot of people clung to and to oppose getting viruses, and the fact that we do have ancient primordial protective systems, having gone through these things in ancient past. And so that's, understanding those things, of course, will help us to prevent getting something worse down the road. All right, I'm going to just kind of click through a bunch of these topics and hopefully give you a sense of what they're about, and you can take a look at it. NASA begins critical final test on the Mega Moon rocket. Now, there's a nice little picture of, this is from the Phys.org news site, the massive Artemis 1 rocket, illuminated at dusk atop a mobile launcher. So on Friday, NASA began a 2-day-long test. So still going on. They're calling it the SLS, the Space Launch System. And they did this whole thing. They're doing like a dry run to the simulated countdown. It says known as they call this a wet dress rehearsal. It's the final major test before the Artemis 1 mission this summer. This is going to be an uncrewed lunar launch that will eventually be followed by boots on the ground, probably by 2026. Wow, that seems like a long time off, but hey, things move slowly sometimes. This test was, the reason why they call it a wet dress rehearsal is because they're basically loading it with the fuel. So supercooled liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen will be loaded into the SLS from ground systems just as a real launch. This is a big one, 322, 98. It's 98 meters tall, expected to be the most powerful in history at its time of operation. So this is kind of really cool. So Sunday morning, the SLS rocket and Orion crew capsule fixed atop. They're just going through all the stuff. They will not be lighting up the engines, the RS-25s. They're going to just make sure everything, they're going to go through everything, and then before liftoff, they're going to basically scrub the mission and then drain the fuel. This is all about testing the system. So this is cool steps toward the actual launch. Again, first it'll be an unmanned launch, and then later, the old boots on the ground. A story that kind of surprised me, because I, kind of study a lot of biology. I was surprised that at this point in time, March 31st, 2022, this story from Science News says that scientists have published the first complete gapless sequence, and that's kind of the difference. A sequence of human genome 2 decades after the Human Genome Project produced the first draft human genome sequence. According to researchers, having a complete gap-free sequence of the roughly 3 billion bases in our DNA is critical for understanding the full spectrum of human genomic variation and for understanding the genetic contributions to certain diseases. So that's really a cool thing. The fact that as they initially called it a draft, I understood that it would take a while to fill and everything, but very cool the fact that they now have a complete genomic. Generating a truly complete sequence represents an incredible scientific achievement, providing the first comprehensive view of our DNA blueprint, said Eric Green, MD, PhD, who was the director of a lot of this. All right, so originally the Human Genome Project, I'm scrolling down, had mapped about 92% of the genome. And my dog is so excited, he's outside barking about hearing that. So anyway, take a look through this long article. I'm going to scroll down to the very end. Actually, it has references to, wow. It's amazing when you get down to a huge article and find out that page upon page is just all these amazing references. So take a look at that. Kind of an interesting point in time. And just coincidentally, I happen to have the story that I mentioned to Robert and Libby. Robert and Libby did a presentation at the Houston National Science Teacher Association conference about scaling the universe, getting a sense of how big, and of course, if you're scaling the universe, it also is how small. The fact that the from a mathematical standpoint, the tiniest to the biggest in our universe is really an amazing ride, and I'm sure that part of what they were trying to do is give people a sense of, how that feels in scale. So I thought it was kind of neat that this story popped up March 31st from the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. It says NASA's Hubble Space Telescope has established an extraordinary new benchmark, detecting the light of a star that existed within the first billion years after the universe's birth in the Big Bang. And they point out this means this is the farthest individual star ever seen to date. And of course, when they say to date, that means they might be expecting more. It says it's a huge leap further back in time from the previous single star record holder, which was detected by the Hubble Space Telescope in 2018. And it said that star existed when the universe was about 4 billion years old, or 30% of its current age, at a time when the astronomers refer to as redshift 1.5. And the astonishing thing, and it would certainly make sense in the conference or the presentation that Libby and Robert were doing, is understanding. These when people talk about numbers being astronomical, and you understand the speed of light and light years and all that thing. The fact that this newly detected star is so far away that its light took 12.9 billion years to even reach the Earth, appearing to us as it did when the universe was only about 7% of its current age. And then they talk about, if you're familiar with astronomy and how light travels, the redshift. It says the smallest objects previously seen at a great distance, such a great distance, would have been clusters of stars or things embedded in galaxies. So this is really pretty amazing. And again, in terms of the scaling of the universe, it is pretty much incomprehensible when you think about something that didn't even emerge into the universe as a star. The first stars after a few billion years past the Big Bang, and then the fact that the light that we are now detecting with the Hubble Space Telescope took multiple billion years to get here. 12.9 billion years to get here is just, again, it's an amazing thing. Now, another amazing thing, especially if you're a squid, is your skin. And I was mentioning that one of the things I do like a lot as a biologist, I see engineers and physicists and chemists trying to develop all sorts of things, and then for me, the really wonderful, exciting part of a story is often the fact that, hey, nature itself had created some of these things, and some of maybe the predecessors to what you're doing again, maybe millions of years ago, maybe even billions of years ago. So this is a cool story because it says squid skin inspired. Now, I don't know how many things you could say have been inspired by squid skin, but this is one of them. It says a squid skin inspired cup cozy will keep your hands cool and your coffee hot. So you're basically talking about something real commonly used. I mean, you see people, if you go to Starbucks and spend a ton of money on your hot cup of coffee and they put it in that little thing to protect your hands, you think, wow, that one doesn't look like squid skin. So what could they have done here? It says, drawing inspiration from cephalopod skin, engineers have invented an adaptive fabric that can be used to insulate the contents of coffee cups, to-go boxes, and containers of almost any size. In a new paper, the researchers described the manufacturing process that they developed, which enables economical mass production of their novel material. Now, again, there's a lot to read through here, so I'll give you just a kind of a short thing. It says the innovation is an infrared reflecting metallized polymer film. Okay, so you're thinking, okay, so they've got a polymer film, they got some kind of plastic film, and then it has some kind of a layer of metal on it. And that would mean anybody who's seen like the shiny aluminum things that you'll know that by like a Mylar blanket. If you've seen the Mylar camping blankets that you can put on, and because it has a reflective metal thing, it keeps the heat from leaving. The thing about this material is that it's tunable. Now, why does that refer to the cephalopod skin? Well, if you've ever seen the cool nature things about an octopus that can change its color or can, make even like waves of light and dark appear, they have things called chromatophores. So chromatophores contain pigments and things, and in a squid, they can control it. It's a very complex thing, but basically what they do is they can change the size of these chromatophores and allows them to communicate in camouflage, which has all kinds of really cool things. They use it for courting, and they use it to hide from their prey. They use it to, camouflage so they can gather food. So basically, what they've done by following this same technique is that they have a flexible material, and it has little islands of these reflective materials, the metal things, and by changing or kind of stretching it out, they're in effect changing the size of those little islands of reflectivity, and it means they can tune it and improve the energy efficiency of all kinds of different systems. So this almost sounds like you're thinking, well, great, do we really need to keep our coffee hot or cold? Is that a big deal? But it'll be applicable to all sorts of other things. They talk about there are an enormous array of applications for this material. Think of all the perishable goods that have been delivered to people's homes during the pandemic. Any package or Amazon thing that needs temperature controlling. The big deal here is that they've known about this kind of interesting process that mimics chromatophores in squid, but it wasn't cheap to do. So now they have come up with a process where they can make whole rolls of this material, and it can be, as they say, it can sort of be tuned for a particular use. And the most commonly understandable thing would be kind of a hot coffee cup. So that's neat. In terms of innovate, my next link is about. I just happened to see. I thought this was kind of cool, and at first I wasn't sure. I thought it was UW. I thought maybe it was University of Wisconsin, where I knew some people that graduated in my family, but it's actually the University of Washington's Foster School. It's the Burke Center for Entrepreneurship. And one of the things I think is always good to understand is that in this case, the Environmental Innovation Challenge, one of the things I think that really makes sense is for people to understand that, sometimes the innovations that you make that help the environment might also actually, be something economically helpful to you in terms of not just an invention, but, getting into a field that allows you to be nice to the environment and make a bunch of money too at the same time. And I don't think there's anything wrong with those two things existing. So just a quick look at it. The winner, one of the big prizes was the $15,000 Alaska Airlines Grand Prize. Was about catalytic carbon. It says an interdisciplinary University of Washington student group that is creating a solution to turn waste. Now, and this is, again, makes perfect sense. If you have all kinds of waste material and it has a lot of carbon, the thing that they're doing is they're getting a twofer out of it. It says they don't tell a lot about this thing, and I'm sure we could find more about the exact nature of their process, but it says that it's a solution to turn waste into carbon nanotubes and reusable hydrogen gas. So two really neat things. And as they say, one man's trash is another man's treasure. The fact that you have all this raw material that you then turn into something very expensive and something very useful, carbon nanotubes and the hydrogen gas. It says the solution aims to increase efficiency in recycling processes. And in particular, I was thinking of my good friend Scott Ludoff at Scrappy Pappy's here in the Wheeling area, because he's focused a lot on trying to do things with reuse of plastic so that it doesn't just get burnt or landfilled. It says approximately 14.5 million tons of plastic ended up in landfills in 2018. So that's just amazing. So they won some other things. There's a couple other $10,000 Herbert B. Jones Foundation second place prize to the Just Right Bite, a team of Master of Science in entrepreneurship that developed pet food products from insects. Now, I'll tell you what, I talked to Robert and Libby about the giant mosquitoes down in Houston, and people have often understood that. Well, I know some dogs that were just thrilled when the last cicada group emerged, and they found that they were tastier than their dog food. So this idea of using insect proteins for pet food is pretty cool. Starbucks actually gave a $5,000 third prize for Arctic Biotech Oath, a team of University of Alaska Anchorage students who are using microorganisms to sustainably extract rare earth materials. So that's a cool one. We've known that a lot of microbes have the ability to leach really valuable materials out of different ores without using dangerous chemicals and things. So the Earth Lab people called Garden Pro, a team of the University of Washington students developing more affordable and accessible gardening solutions. And the Best Idea for Climate Impact Prize, sponsored by Eric Carlson, was Ultropia, a team of students who developed a low-carbon footprint in an all-in-one laundry machine. Again, you sometimes think about processes like making cement or washing your clothes, and this is really cool that looking at just changing the carbon footprint in something as mundane as washing your clothes. The winner of the $1,000 Connie Bourassa Shaw Spark Award was Plant Seal, a group of students who developed plant-based compostable food packaging. Now I've seen this. This is cool. This is apparently a new one. The thing that's neat about it, and I've seen some stuff made from plant materials before that are the big deal is that it's compostable. You can put this in a compost situation, and just you have this packaging that meets the standards for all those weird chemicals that people have added to things by not having them, basically. But it's also you can compost it and not just dump it in the landfill again. Kind of a recurring theme here in this thing, and a lot of it was based on the plastics issue. I'm going to touch on. I'm just going to touch on this 10 failures topic. I thought. Again, it's just sometimes scientists dismiss an idea that they can't think of if they can't think of a way to test it. So this is one of those stories that you're going to want to scroll through and look at all these things. It is surprising to me that all of the things that people maybe observed in a scientific situation, they're talking about science, some would say, is an enterprise that should concern itself solely with cold, hard facts. Flights of imagination should be the province of philosophers and poets. Now, one of the things that Robert has often said is that some of the best science first showed up in science fiction. So that would go against that thought. And of course, no one less than Albert Einstein once observed that imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited to what we know right now, while imagination embraces the entire world stimulating process. So that's kind of a cool thing. So they basically go through and talk about things that we all think of. Well, everybody understood this stuff. Well, they didn't at first. The first one is atoms, composition of stars, the canals on Mars. It talks. I mean, this is another one of the things that people kind of got wrong at the first time or didn't test. The one that they're all cool. Detecting neutrinos, nuclear energy, age of the Earth, charge parity violation, behaviorism versus the brain, and gravitational waves. All of these are things that sometimes people looked at and thought, we can't even test this out. But I did like. I'm going back up to number 7 because one of the things, and of course, if Libby were listening, she would agree with me vehemently on this. It had to do with the whole concept of nuclear fission. And some of this I sort of knew, but I hadn't read it, put it in quite this way. They talk about how in 1934 the Italian physicist Enrico Fermi bombarded uranium, which was atomic number 92, and other elements with neutrons. The particle discovered just 2 years earlier by James Chadwick. Fermi found that among the products was an unidentifiable new element. He thought he had created element 93, heavier than uranium. He could not imagine any other explanation, but in 1938 he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for the demonstration of new radioactive elements. Basically, it said that it turned out that he had unwittingly demonstrated nuclear fission. His bombarded products were actually lighter, previously known elements, fragments split from the heavy uranium nucleus. And so he really didn't understand what he was doing. But it says, later scientists credited with discovering fission, and we're talking about that process, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, didn't understand their results either. Hahn's former collaborator, Lise Meitner, was the one who explained what they'd done. And this is the part that I liked. Another woman chemist, you may see my theme here is that we have some women scientists who have straightened these guys out. Ida Nodak imagined the possibility of fission to explain Fermi's results, but for some reason, nobody listened to her. I thought I detected a little editorial comment in that one. But anyway, this is really fascinating. Like I say, go through, and I noticed that the very latest one, they kind of went in sequence chronologically, because they're talking about how a lot of people thought there wasn't any. It says nowadays astrophysicists are all agog about gravitational waves, which can reveal all sorts of secrets about what goes on in the distant universe. All hail Einstein, whose theory of gravity, general relativity, explains the waves' existence. But Einstein was not the first to propose the idea. So James Clerk Maxwell devised the math explaining electromagnetic waves, and he speculated that gravity might similarly induce waves in a gravitational field. He couldn't figure out how it might happen, but it says a lot of physicists basically just said, "Hey, we're never going to detect those. There's no way of proving it." And so, until recently, it was kind of something that people thought, "Yeah, someday, somehow, maybe," but don't waste any time on it. So this is a real cool story, and it's even cooler because I would point out to you, if you're interested, especially in the gravitational wave thing, that, let me look. It may have been last week or 2 weeks ago. Anyway, one of the coolest stories that just came out is that there has been, it was actually the Saturday, March 19th episode of Radio Science News. If you go back and look at the story on Moonwave, it explains a proposition for detecting gravity waves that is actually really interesting in that it involves the fact that we have for some time been able to measure using laser technology and some reflectors that were put on the moon. We can very, very, very accurately measure the distance between the Earth and the moon. And because we can do that, it means that there's a whole new level of detection for gravity waves that we have not had available to us. And all we have to do is to take the data from the changes in the position of the Earth and the moon, based on these techniques that we already have, and apply that to the detection of a whole different level of gravitational waves. So go back to March 19th and read Moon Wave, and it relates to that story we were just talking about. Let's see. I've got time to cover a few more. The next one is about pause, the global warming pause that didn't happen, and how it hampered climate science. It says the supposed blip in warming fueled climate skeptics and distracted researchers. And if you paid attention to this, you knew that there was a whole thing that basically implied, well, the whole global warming thing, of course, isn't true because it stopped. It's not warming. It had flattened out, and there was a global warming hiatus. And I mean, one of the things that is kind of a shame is that a lot of times people like to take a particular set of facts and really, bend them or use them in arguments to bolster their own opinion, which is not the best way for science to happen. Long story short is that the so-called pause in global warming has to do more with people not reporting, the data not being either accurately or reported in a timely way. And so it's kind of a neat thing to look through that. The big bottom line from at least this author's point of view is that it says the debates over whether the hiatus was real or not fed public confusion and undermined efforts to convince people to take aggressive action to reduce climate change. And this is Lewandowski, says that's an important lesson going forward. So this is really important, because if there's something that you really need to do and somehow people can say, well, it's not a problem, don't even worry about it, or even argue that it's completely stopped. So now, again, I'm going to probably not get to all the topics that I wanted to, but I put this story up. This one is about the Avars, the Avars of the Avars. And I thought this was kind of fascinating. Now I'm going to just say part of my reason for being fascinated by this is because these guys are probably some of my relatives. One of the fun things that has occurred in past years, especially with all the genomic study, is the fact that people are able to go back and figure out things that they were not aware of before this technique could be applied. And so I just happened to hear a story on CNN this morning talking about Lviv, which is the capital of the Ukraine. And I was very familiar with all this because I kind of figured out that all my relatives kind of came from that region. And I knew ahead of time that when my ancestors who came to this part of the eastern United States to dig coal and work in the mines and that kind of stuff, I had understood that they were listed as having come from Galicia, or that was their country of origin. And this morning, unbeknownst to me, Lviv was the city which is now Lviv in the Ukraine, was the capital of this kingdom of Galicia, which had a long and interesting past with kings and princes. And the kind of long story short that applies to this thing about the Avars is that what would have been my home territory, and as I jokingly told my wife when she sent my ancestry sample off, I said, well, I know where my folks came from, and basically it's probably going to show everybody that conquered them, like Attila the Hun and all that. And sure enough, it showed that I had a component of sort of all the, even though it was mostly all this Central and Eastern European ancestry, I had little dollops of Attila the Hun and the Swedes who came down, and even there was a period of time when that part of Poland, because the Polish king had hired mercenaries to come down and help protect against the Swedes. I even had a little bit of that too. So anyway, cool story. Read about the Avars. It's another little bit of that part of the country. Let me turn this down just a hair. That part of the Central European continent, which had all sorts of people, but this particular group is now becoming more known and more understood in the Carpathian Basin, which is that western part of Ukraine where the Carpathian Mountains are. because of all these really cool genomic studies, and links back to our story about the genome. But they're using genomic studies in archaeology a lot. So this is fascinating stuff. So hey, for more fascinating stuff, just go to radiosciencenews.org and click through those links, or pay attention to next week's show and see what we come up with.